Sorry, Uli, just a second. We have some noise in the background. I'm not sure who it is. Could everyone make sure they're muted? Okay, go ahead, Uli.
So first of all, this is going to be our loan, so our interest charges and so on, as in the budget identified. The actual cost of the loan will not start as per budget until 2025, or at least that's the anticipation of this budget. The other thing, midterm, I think that we should have further consideration around is if it is warranted to think about establishing a septic service and taking this out of the overall waste services, but not a discussion for today, but a consideration down the road.
Okay, thanks.
Line 30 for the transfer from reserves, it's highlighted yellow just because the projected for the year is a different value than I would have shown you in December or in November. It's based on the actual value spent over the year, so I think it's a little bit lower than what I showed. And then on line 30, it's just demonstrating that we are moving that 300,000 for the economic development. It still has not been issued to the LK. Lower event, so we hope that will proceed. So just highlighting that changed.
What's 25 phase 2 works?
That's prep on the trench, the drainage trench, the south end.
Yeah,
design.
some of the development works is just to, we actually have a fairly healthy stabilization reserve. So, but less so on the regular reserve. So that one was just utilizing some reserve in 2025 to do a capital project. And then of course the prior year surplus was updated since, and there's still a few final items coming through, so that is subject to a little change, but it's the latest and greatest there, a little bit of a surplus. Okay, any questions on revenues before we jump into expenses? The lead hand value on line 51 has changed. We share, since we spoke in November, we share that the lead hand salary expenses and other expenses with the recycling, so it's still with East Recycling, so S186. So that was changed from, and that one's highlighted because the transfer between the services haven't occurred yet, so that's an item that remains there.
So on lead hand, I did have a question tied to that because lead hand costs went up. That was a staffing issue, lots of shifts missed or people not being able to be available. So yeah, it jumped from a budget of 23 to year-end projection of over 32. Yeah. And with that, there's lead hand overtime, lead hand benefits, and lead hand travel. With more staff and the additional supervisory positions we had, I was hoping we would see a projection of that overtime should not be a few thousand. Benefits, of course, are tied to projected salary based on whatever schedule they have. And then the same, the travel. We're showing almost $12,000 for travel. And I thought, again, the point of making sure we are better at coordinating, having staff on site, making sure alternative staff can come in and fill in the shift at wherever Boswell, Crawford Bay, or whatever, where there's somebody calls in, that we'll be able to cut this travel down to really just covering picking up money and making deposits and those few things. So it's a small amount,
yeah.
But if we've invested considerably in staff overall, then the lead hand role maybe should be eventually expected to be more focused on fairly routine stuff and not all this extra driving around to cover part of a shift at a transfer station because someone comes in ill.
Yeah. Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. We, the assistant supervisors, we just received the accepted letters for all three. So those will, I think they start on Monday, actually. So they're we expect to see some differences, but, you know, we still have a few months of onboarding and things like that. The lead hands, actually, that's largely why that one on line 51 is highlighted, is because the lead hand in for the east it's budgeted at a 25-hour work week, and because of staffing challenges at a lot of our sites up the east shore, we had some staff on a paid leave, and then so the lead hand ended up working substantially more than the 25 hours. So with the new supervisor, I think we are hoping to see that drop. So I put it back down for budget for 24
But
to the 25-hour.
I'd like to see all the others follow. I mean, because at a $32,000 salary, yeah, the expenses follow that. But, you know, we had $2,000 of overtime, which shouldn't be in the budget, shouldn't be an expectation as the budget for $2,000 of overtime on lead hand anymore. And the same with that larger amount of time, 32,000 instead of 23, we had a budget of 10,353 for travel, and 100% of that was used at the extra hours. So now if the hours are going back down, why is the travel budget at almost 12,000, 11,700? I'd rather see these numbers, even though it's small, maybe travel should be 5,000. If we don't have an expectation, I don't know how many kilometers that is, but that's a lot of money, 11,700.
So
Or is that blending other, because it's not 11,700, it's 11,700 is 70%, so it's like
Chair,
15 or 16,000 of travel.
Chair,
Yes,
in regards to the travel, you have now an assistant supervisor that as well travels to sites. Part of our issues that were identified with the management of our staff was really the presence at site, coaching and training our staff, being there when there are problems arise. So we have to expect whatever the lead hand travels less, the supervisor travels now to site, and you will have at least the same amount of travel, but it's shared between the lead hand and the supervisor's assistant, or assistant supervisor, sorry.
so maybe it should be supervisory travel, so there's no expectation it's in. Again, I'm kind of talking about individual positions. If it's for multi-positions, there shouldn't be an expectation that's there for one position. Okay, no, that's good, sorry, carry on.
okay.
My
Oh,
turn.
Sorry, the same with the overtime. The
Overtime,
overtime doesn't matter if we have supervisors or lead hands. The overtime is created when we have on short-term a fill-in, and doesn't matter who fills it in, the overtime is required, right? Anytime when a lead hand has on short-term to jump in and it is not their normal scheduled work time, it triggers overtime. So it is very much dependent what happens with the other staff. If we don't have much leaves from other staff or unforeseen leaves, we won't have much overtime. But if there's unforeseens like we had last year where somebody is gone or frequently gone, then that triggers that overtime stepping in because the alternative is site closure.
again, I was hoping our additional supervisory positions would have, make us more agile, that we can get some staff in those positions. And I don't know if we have lieu time or time off in lieu of overtime, but Director, I won't belabor it much more. I just looking for a pattern where we're being more efficient overall with this travel and overtime. Director Vandenberg, though, you had a question?
Yes, and I'm referring to lines 52 and 53, that being the waste spotters. And, no, pardon me, 51 and 52, lead hands and waste spotters. So in the comments, it's 6.2 CPI, 2% thereafter, some increase for mechanics, including training. What does that 2% thereafter mean?
That just means in 25, 26, 27, and 28, there's just a 2% inflator rather than so from 23 to 24, there was a 6.2% increase.
Yeah.
And then in future years, there was a 2% increase annually.
That's just budgeted. You'll still go by actual CPI.
Yes, yeah, it's
Okay.
just using that as a placeholder for now.
The other question I have is, now I go to the landfill here quite often. And when it comes to the waste spotters, Is there a big turnover, staff? There's new faces there all the time. And it may be the time of day that I go, but I go there pretty often.
Through the trade, there's also the wastewater is part of the RWE, the Recycling Waste Educator Group. So that group can either work as a recycling depot educator at one of the two area recycling depots, or they can work as a wastewater at the tipping area. So there's sort of 3 locations that they rotate through, so it could be that you are seeing people in different
So they don't
ways.
get bored.
Yeah, and it depends on all the different shifts and various things, so it depends on availability, and we actually try and rotate them through so that they keep experience in the waste versus recycling.
Okay, and what does LFA breaks mean?
Landfill attendant breaks, so the collective agreement requires, we're in some negotiations with the union at the moment in regards to that. So they have a working lunch, but they are in the collective agreement permitted 2 15-minute breaks. And for a long time, we've just worked where they just kind of take those breaks between customers, but a lot of our sites are getting too busy now, whereas a single person actually can't take that time and take a break. So it's still tentative, but what we budgeted is if we actually have to pay that half an hour in addition at the end of their day, they're not able to take breaks during the day. So at some sites, they can do that, and other sites they can't, and we can't because the RWE group, the recycling educators and wastewaters, they're not at every site, but they're also not union, so we can't rotate them to the landfill attendant position. So there's a complexity of the staffing there, and we're trying to make it efficient, but also work in accordance with the collective agreement.
Right, okay, thanks.
Also on line 52, before we move on, the wastewaters at previous cap value has gone down, and that's because when we discussed this budget in November, the other so the training and onboarding and that kind of stuff. So these budgets are based on actual shift hours at each site. But that didn't leave any room for training and onboarding and things like that. So but when we talked about this in November, that RWE group, which includes the recycling staff that works under the A119 budget, was all included in here, and I didn't have those two separated. So I've since moved those over. So this is just for the wastewater. So it's slightly reduced.
And Mr. Chair, can I ask,
Definitely.
maybe not such an obvious question, but I just don't understand. Why do we have 2 services, 186 and 119? Why can't, it's all related on the same property, why can't it just all be combined and just split out as per accountant rules?
Not entirely all related.
Not entirely?
You want to give a little bit of a quick pulse notes on how our or Amy or Uli, I guess, on how our allocation services move money?
Maybe I can start and then
Sure.
whoever Lee can add in. It was a request at the joint committee some time ago to clearly identify costs for recycling and also for organics, and we were just focused on organics.
Cost recovery especially.
Yeah, and they had different work orders, and I tried to do subtotal. I didn't do subtotals for the different items, but it just I think they wanted to pull out recycling and composting from the waste, so it was really clear what it was costing us for all these different services, and I actually be going on first doing 8 budgets versus 3 was quite a bit of work, but in looking at the joint that next week, or the agenda you'll see coming out is going to have a framework for a letter to the province about PR programs in our area. And then having them separated, and we can very clearly say, this is what it's costing us to run a recycling program in our district. It's actually, it is helpful in that regard.
So you're saying it makes the accounting more efficient to split them up because you have limitations when you split them up? And really, it's just an accounting query.
I don't know necessarily, maybe I'll let.
Well, sure, Uli, and this cost recovery thing is a big topic, what we subsidize. But go ahead, Uli.
Yeah, I think it is good to talk about this because from our side, it is additional work to split this out in, and it was requested from us as
Yes.
it was requested from us as staff to add transparency and make it easier to understand where we spend money, recycling, composting, these additional activities that are outside of the core services, and that is the septic, splitting out septic as a separate service is really part of that discussion potentially too. So this came from various directors on the board to split these services out. So we were directed to do that. The alternative to that was, as suggested by one or two municipalities, was to actually have real separate services. So take it entirely out. So difference between an allocation service, what you see right now for recycling and composting, and a regular service is that allocation services do not generate their own revenues. They are entirely funded by allocations out of a regular service. A regular service is established by bylaw with all the processes involved, including ministry approval, public approval, and has its own establishment bylaw that sets accordingly limits of what can be generated through taxation or other form of monies from the public. So they are very regulated, the regular services. These allocation services is really just artificially pulling something out of that in order to, with the hope to create additional transparency. I'm not always sure it does. Sometimes it may create more confusion, because often when people look at these three budgets, they understand these monies add up. But in reality, the allocation budgets are a subset of what you see in the regular service. So the taxation is generated and the tipping fees are generated in the main service. And then there's monies transferred to the allocation services. So they don't have an additional money. They just get money from the main service and use that for whatever service component out of the larger service we want to isolate out of that. And that's what we have done. Difficult to understand, difficult to review, but for some directors, they feel they get greater clarity out of that.
And I appreciate the explanation, I do, transparency and otherwise, but I just see it creating a lot more work. You consider staffing and how you split the loads up when they come in and so on. But that said, I do have a better understanding as to why we're here, where we are today. Don't know if I can totally buy into it yet.
There's a couple other advantages, and I'll ask Yev as well, in case you had any other thoughts. This, to me, this style of bookkeeping, the biggest advantage of A116, I guess, rather, our recycling, it gives us our better hard data when we go to the ministry and say, wow, first you say, decades back, you have to manage all the garbage as regional district. And then you say, we're gonna do recycling, and we said that's a good thing. Then you say, we're gonna advertise it's free in BC, which is not at all free. And then we're gonna just let you make sure it happens and pay the difference. So you can't say recycling's not tied to waste, because I had this discussion in Riendell the other day. Tippett doesn't want to have those bins there at all. They're the waste bins, anything but the waste bins. They want to do curbside per bag pickup with an automated truck, their new truck. This conversation I'll expand later. But some of these bins, people throw whatever in them. They can't be compacted. They're hauling air, they're inefficient. And we don't want that loose stuff in our landfill. We had big issues with poor compaction of our landfills. So pulling the recyclable materials out of the landfill saves our space and defers our multi-million-dollar investments in landfill. And it gets a token amount of money back through the multi-material BC. But they're tied, obviously they're tied, and one is a benefit to society and a benefit to our residual waste. When we got to the organics, one of our partners in particular, and it's on record, Nelson, said, they don't know if they're into this compost thing. They want full cost recovery. So how do you figure that out? Because again, the sloppy stuff you take out of a landfill, that's what generates the leachate and the methane. Creston's in good shape. We're capping it as we go. We're collecting the methane. We're monitoring the leachate. We're showing improvement. That's not cheap. So what do you say? Is that a cost that's attributed to organic separation? The benefit of not so far putting in a liner below and an entire liquid waste treatment plant there with all the approvals would have to become an authority. We'd have to have we have solid waste management plan. We'd have to have liquid waste management plan. Town has that. We could ask them how much work that is. So we've avoided that so far using our partner for a septage and using good practices for the landfill. Some of our larger municipal partners said, well, we want to see all the numbers. We want to see this as paying for itself. Is it recovering fast? So there you go. You got A119 as best as management can do, isolating the costs and saying, here's where we think the money is being spent. Here's where the investments come. And you have to draw your own conclusions about the benefit of not having that in the residual waste pile, say at Creston. But it's inherently obvious. You don't want the sloppy, wet, methane generating stuff leaching through that old pile and ended up on our neighbor's property. So the biggest thing out of this, and staff have talked many times, at some point we may mature to the point where we create these standalone services and maybe we combine some of the other ones so that we're a little less fractured. But if you don't start this process of accountability, where's the money and why do we do it? Because we are required to have a service, as Uli and Amy said, to do anything. We're just using the services we have today, 186, 187, 188, as best staff can. And I think when you look at the hundreds of line items between these three budgets, every year we grow to understand better what the costs are and what the opportunities are. So I'm not uncomfortable with this system. I know you guys would rather it be more simple. Ev, did we miss anything about allocation services, the legality of it or the ability to use them?
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't think so. So I think you and Uli and Amy have covered it off really well. And these are often, like you've mentioned, these statements are requested for the cost to be separated. If we didn't do this and track it, it's easier to track it up front than somebody at the end of the year to ask us to reproduce these statements would take far more effort than it does to produce them as we go. And will also be more accurate if we're doing it from the start.
There you go.
Yeah, thanks, and through the chair as well, we've now, it's taken us a few years, but I think things are fairly streamlined. So, they all have new work orders and the money gets allocated based on that. And the first couple of years were a lot of work to get things settled, but now that they are, it's not a huge undertaking and it does provide a really good, clear picture of the different services.
It's like Starbucks coffee. It is a huge undertaking, but there's a bigger Starbucks cup that it could be worse.
Okay, so moving along, down on line 105, that is consulting fees for Creston. The change here is, and you will see this at the upcoming joint greenhouse landfill gas assessment. So the results of that have, the recommendation is to do the Green Cliff Layer report finally. So that is removing that $12,000 from 24 and then 26 and 28. So that's just the general engineering oversight for those years, and then on the alternate years we'll have the 12,000 for the greenhouse gas report.
And is everybody good with everything, the 100 or 50 some lines we skipped? There were no changes from last time. So good?
Down on line 123, which is it's really the one that we have CECAS, which is the invasive plants, and they we've added 5,000 because there's a fair amount of weeds around the yard and garden that need to be dealt with, so that was 5,000 with that, since we.
Got half a sec, I got my pages next to it.
They're not under from the contracted services, or the end of contracted services.
I had a question on the weed thing while I'm finding my place here. I'm getting a lot of questions because the province is entertaining 5-year weed control programs for Fortis or Hydro or stuff like that, and use of glyphosate. We told CKIS whether or not we want to use glyphosate on our sites. I can't remember, I know we had a conversation about that, Roundup, or have we limited the herbicides being used, or have we left it to their discretion?
Through the chair, there is a board resolution to not use glyphosate. CKIS does use 2 different products in the herbicides. And actually we have a report coming to committee with an update on that program, so that we were looking to actually have a Christmas meeting, but CKIS was delayed in getting the meeting with our staff, so we've got that meeting now, and there's a bit of follow-up, so that'll be coming really to the March meeting, so we can get some direction. There's some suggestions on some new methods of treatment at some sites.
It's a little bit sideways here, but it is part of what we have contracted for through CKIS. So if you could give us on the side, I don't know if my colleagues are getting these kind of questions. I have 3 or 4 emails hanging right now where I gave incomplete answers. Because I couldn't quite recall policy and when we made the statement and what we told CKIS.
Well, that's good information because this member here is now the chair of the CKIS innovative plants, stumble on that task force, so it's good stuff to know.
Okay.
Yes, so through the chair, Nathan's preparing that report, and I
See you
suspect
next
it will
month.
happen in March.
Question on 121, the question is, like, these are expenses to manage mini propane, wood, metal, tires, ODS, and I know we had conversations about it, but we do get recovery in this. Do we not? Like, where's the revenue? Is this strictly is this a cost after it is allocated or picked up or bought? Or where's the revenue line that offsets this cost?
Yeah. So through the chair, this is just the expense. Metal is included in there. There is no expense in actual this 5-year plan for metal at this time. It's if we had, so that our metals contract, scrap metal contract does have a servicing fee, but the metal we make on it pays for that and then some. So we actually don't have a net expense for metal at present, but all the other items we actually do. So we don't make money on propane, wood, the tires, that kind of stuff. So these ones are purely expense. The revenue from the metals comes in at user fees specified, user fees. So that's line at number 12. So we've got, I think it was a neighborhood of 40,000 or 50,000 so that we're making in off the scrap metal at present. And that's just dependent on market values for the metal, obviously.
Okay, so then that's offset, that number's offset by the 40 grand-ish.
Yeah, I mean, there would be, if there wasn't a metal value to it, then there would be an expense there.
For a while, we couldn't give iron away. There's always been a bit of value to copper and aluminum, but couldn't give ferrous metals away.
Yeah, and the wood grinding is the big expense there. We generally try to do wood grinding and the metal twice a year. We've had a couple of odd years with the atmospheric river when we couldn't get down to the coast or they couldn't get out to us, and then we've had some equipment failures. So it's usually fairly consistent where we have 2 servicing. We've had a few years where we only had 1, and then we've had one really big one, and so it's been a little bit hard to track the last couple of years, but we've got the contract settled and with the new drone, it doesn't like to fly in the off months, so we're hoping, and now we're using the drone to measure the piles, so. And
I was gonna say, these also come to, because servicing can be awkward and organizing it there's two things here. We get the Eco Depot in place to take what we can, and then some of these products we can say no. But I can't see us saying no to wood. We're not gonna say no to metal. And I don't know if it's worth saying no to some of the others, because they'll end up in a black garbage bag in the compactor at Crawford Bay.
And through the chair, the propane is becoming an EPR program. So that cost should be reduced. We don't know exactly, we think it was 25 or 6 when we onboarded. Tires is one item we're looking at in regards to whether or not we should be collecting it at all of our sites. I think Boswell doesn't, but that's one of the few that don't.
How do you say no to that?
It would be.
They'll end up in the ditches.
Yeah, if we don't wanna stop doing it, if there's no alternative, the tire stewards should, they actually, Rex said, you have 22 locations across your district, why are you even accepting them? But the problem is, are they accepting them at places that either have capacity to accept the volume that we get, or at the locations that serve the residents? So it's not something we would just go, we don't wanna deal with this anymore, we would wanna make sure that there's a.
Same problem with batteries now.
Your batteries are generally not too bad. They often have a bit of value as well, so sometimes they add from sites.
They're not being taken around Greater Vancouver anymore,
Mm,
no more.
yeah, we haven't had an issue with batteries that I'm aware of. There's some new batteries there's some concern of batteries causing fires
Lithium.
and various things, and that might be some of the reason. So there's new batteries coming into the EPR programs as well, mostly in regards to electric bikes and scooters and cars and things, but it's great. Okay. So.
If I may add, there's a lot more information in regards to these various materials and their cost and revenues to come when we bring forward the efficiency study that will go into the details of these various materials, what they cost us, what the revenue they generate, and should we continue.
It's a question to ask taxpayers all the time. What would you like us to not do if you wanna see your property taxes go down? And then what are you gonna do in response to that? Haul it 50 miles further, or leave it illegally in a garbage bag, or leave it somewhere else?
Okay, so
You're all the way to where you at now?
149,
That
provisions.
red.
So I don't mean to alarm anyone with the red. So the value there, I just highlighted it because it is higher than the budget, obviously, and that was based on an assumption from the change in where the placeholder was and what's said that annual tonnages are input into the calculation. So the value for 23 that I suspect would be for 23 went up. However, where finance has just completed the updated calculation, and it might be less than that. So I just flagged it to point out, so right now I have it budgeted in 23 at that 280, it could be less. I left it at that because I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. And then the reason why the rest of it is highlighted is because if generally we base future years on what our current year is, so I will change the recommendation in the agenda is to recommend the budgets as discussed, with exception of changes in provisions and transfer to and from other services. So this is one that may change before it gets its place.
Awkward language provisions, that's our statutory contribution or contribution to a statutory reserve following a federal formula, I guess, on what we need to put aside. And that changes all the time because as we do incremental closure, then that calculation can change big time. We're looking at phase 1E closure, whatever next. But I wish, you'd use a different word there. I don't think if the public look at provisions and that amount, hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's pretty nebulous what the heck that is.
So Amy, can I take you back to line 130 for a moment? And it's to do with the repairs on presumably the scale. And the comment there says looking for a local service provider. Have you got that resolved? I know going back and forth as a customer, there were occasions when there was issues with, it was more of the software. Because I used to be in the aggregate industry, I know how the scales work. And did that ever get smoothed out? Spent 30 grand on it this year, it's last year.
Yes, through the chair, the scale, the errors and the issues that we were experiencing have been addressed. But we generally use Pacific Scale, and their service folks are out of the Lower Mainland. So, you know, they can do 1 or 2 trips up here and it ends up being very expensive. Our operations staff was in contact with someone more locally that could be able to do that servicing, so that's what
Nobody from Alberta? A lot of there.
yeah, I think it was actually someone from the Crescent Valley, so hopefully we can save on some costs there. Okay, so the provision is just highlighted because it could change, and if it does change, we expect it actually may go down. You'll see lots of yellow highlighting in the debenture sections, interest and principal. That's because we updated all the loan calculations. Some of them, especially that were done a year or 2 ago, obviously had very low interest rates, and then so these all substantially changed with now using 4.5% interest rate for the long-term borrowing, so those were all updated based on that.
And it may not be any comfort, but it was West. I think they're gonna push to $700,000 or $740,000 a year financing interest and principal in a few years. You're getting up to 700,000 because of the capital works they have to be looking at in the next few years. But the whole thing here, I think strategically is, you know, you put our capital, incremental capital works in the year that you think makes sense now, based on, we need reports, we need designs, we need whatever.
Yes.
But again, if we can not borrow at one time and do borrow at another time, a huge difference.
Yes, through the chair, and when we get to the stage of design and know more precise values, and when we go to ask for award of these kinds of contracts, we can look then if we have available reserves and decide if, you know, so we could do a financial
Deferred
plan amendment and change it to reserves if they're available, rather than do, or maybe use reserves for part of the financing and not all of it. So those are some ways to reduce some costs. It's hard to predict what those will be in 3 years' time, so.
But if we used reserve to finance last 6 months of year, whatever, then we should borrow the full amount and take part of that and replenish the reserve if that's legal or allowed. I guess that's something maybe Yeb would have to comment on later. We shouldn't just rob the reserves. There may be other ways around it, but I would like to look at that.
Willie, did you have your hand up? I saw.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yes, just briefly getting back to the provisions. If the amount is not further reduced after reviewing of our data, this presents right now a cost of roughly $42 per ton of waste accepted. I think that's a good metric. If somebody asks about why do we pay 130 some dollars per ton, the first $42 goes already in closure and post-closure of the landfill. So I think it's a good number to have in the back of your head.
And the less tonnage we put in the landfill, the lower that calculation will be, which is why we're good to have recycling and organics diversion. That's the intangible benefits to the public when they say, why are you spending money on this or that? Because there's huge expenses once you put garbage in a pile. Huge for how many years? 150 or whatever our time frame of monitoring that pile of garbage be.
And through the chair, we do have the geological study and the exemption study in its final draft, and will be coming to an upcoming meeting for your.
Oh, where's the line item for the engineering of the studies? Oh, sorry, no, it's not in front of us right now, it's earlier.
Okay, so then, getting into the grants account, so line 169, it's just demonstrating moving that payment to the Lower Whitney Bend in 24. And there was an updated value in the grants to the town of Creston for the organics infrastructure and collection program, and that's for the funding of their bins for the curbside program.
Difference.
That's the actuals was updated since we spoke in November. The reserve transfers on 172 are adjusted since the agenda went out last week, and that's just essentially where was adjusted to make sure that the service is balanced once all the other adjustments were made. So you can see we don't have substantial values going in there in the next few years. You know, we have reserves, so I'm not really concerned about it, but as you can see, there's a lot of funds coming, a lot of projects funded by borrowing because we don't have enough in reserves. So, you know, the taxation is already at 10%. We increased tipping fees by 10%. I think in the future we'll have to, once we get this tipping fee assessment and systems efficiency review, a closer look at what we're contributing to reserves and how we're pricing things to balance the service. So it's not as high as I'd like to see, but to make them higher, we'd have to increase taxes. So maybe for this year, that's, I don't know if you have any feedback on that, is that
I'm just gonna note right now, I don't know if Shannon noted, Tom's leaving for a while, he's got an appointment and then he may return, but Director Newell's gonna leave for a bit. Shannon recorded that, probably did.
the contribution to reserve on line 174 is for that stabilization reserve. So as a reminder, usually what that is that half of the past year surplus goes into a stabilization reserve and the other half remains in service. The item for the projected year end is lower than budgeted. That's because the actual year end for the service was lower than expected. So that's added there than the budget. I actually have 0 in there for 24 because it was a pretty small surplus. And actually the version that I think I had previously was about 14,000. So it didn't have any, it looks like it might be closer to 80. So this may actually require a recommendation to the board not to contribute to stabilization reserves this year. We didn't have it prepared, but it's because I didn't realize that it was, I actually think I had a 3,000 entry there. The thing is, if we put half of it in the stabilization reserves, it means that we have virtually nothing going into the regular reserve this year. I'd have to reduce that one, the 69,000 going into regular reserves. And we already, currently we have around $1 million in the stabilization reserve. So I don't think it needs to go there this year.
Okay, so just make a note on the recommendation. We're not gonna do it right now, but it would be subject to provisions or contribution changes to and from other services, plus a 0 contribution to reserves from the stabilization as well. Yeah, we'll do something along that line.
So the transfer to other services, so line 176 is to project management. The budget, the transfer to the A116, the recycling, is at 364. It was actually at 360 when we met in November. The transfer to the compost service, so that's on line 179, that has gone up by about 100,000, and for the most part, that is because there was lower tipping fee revenue than expected there. And for the most part, that is there's virtually no ICI and very little cell pulp coming to the site, so we would like to see that increase this year.
So when we're not bringing in compost, the cost goes up because it's not offset by tipping fees?
the amount of the subsidy has to go up because our contract is a fixed price. Plus overhead, paying the loan for creating the site.
Yeah.
It's a fairly substantial, I don't know what amount it is, what was our total borrowing for that site?
I want to say 900,000.
It's $1 million range for paying that off. Is that 5 years?
It was a 5-year.
So we will ditch that.
Yeah.
Soon.
You can see it over the course of the 5-year plan, that drops down quite a bit. You know, we go down, it's only at 250 in 2028, so, and it's right around there. It drops off, you can look at it more closely when I get into that service.
But again, why would you even subsidize by 2028 the composting by $250,000? Well, what's the alternative? It ends up in a black bag in the landfill. We don't get a self-attenuated certificate.
Mhm.
And you spend $10 or $20 million on leachate collection and treatment. So it's a mitigating, something we gotta worry about.
That's a tough one, that compost. That's educating a populace. And that's tough to do. And a lot of people are composting right on their own property. We do. We have chickens and we don't generate any compost because we take care of it all. But you need to have compost in there in order to pay for the O&M of that.
But we have town and your residents are participating. We're
Yeah.
getting reasonable volumes from town. We're just not getting all the other.
It's out there to them start using it.
It's getting organized, but I don't think we have anything actually set up yet.
Yeah, and through the chair, the commercial haulers up until recently have said they weren't even interested in developing a business plan to separate collection. They originally were telling us you should ban it, so then it's a even playing field, everybody has to do it.
Force it.
We've had one provider that said they would work on some pricing. So, and now the facilities over in the West Central are in place, they seem a little bit more ready to move on it. Our staff this year, one of the focus, because we've been doing a fair amount of work on the curbside referendum and such, but the ICI engagement is high on our priority list.
And one local service provider has a new truck here or coming and it's tips the bins automatically and it would be a split truck, I understand, so it's easier once they get set up, but it's a big
There's
investment.
lots of quantity to start with. Not a huge quantity, wasn't much point starting, so still go back to, I'm not even sure exactly who's gonna buy it. What the quality is of it.
Well, I know back in where I was from, that was a huge problem. The quality of the material coming in, it just was a losing battle. Very labor intensive, it was very frustrating. To change attitudes is a long haul and very tough to do.
That's why we have Todd doing, is he doing a lot of that?
Automatic,
Yeah, so they will show us the light, one way or the other.
Chair, so the A1 line, A1, for example, line 180 showing A102, that's the general resource recovery. It's been seeing a pretty big increase. We had the assistant supervisors added in, and this is split between the 3 subregions. There's I think it's 1.3 million for that service in total. And it's split based on the operating expenses for each of the services and the East made a pretty big increase this year in comparison to the other 2 services. So sometimes it's in the low 20s in the percentage, and this time around it was in the high 20s. So it just took on a larger portion of that share.
Is it based on the previous year? So, because we had a lot of activity setting up the composting facility and other little tweaking of sites and stuff. It's based on the previous year, isn't it? How you do the allocation for the next year?
Yeah, and so every year
Yeah.
it changes based on the
We have to look
annual.
back.
So what's the problem we're trying to solve here? We're spending this kind of money composting
Oh, no,
to
no,
generate the life of our landfills and minimize the amount of post monitoring that we have to do in order to get a reclamation certificate. Is that?
no. Well, it's a little different from this line item, but we are
That's
currently,
substantial.
we are currently a self-attenuating landfill. So we don't have liners, leachate collection and treatment, and then somehow managing that in new ponds or lagoons or whatever. We don't have that in this site. Once you get over a certain size, like you would have had in the previous experience, you had that already probably in Alberta. There's that, there's the long-term viability of the landfill based on when it's gonna be full, there's all kinds of things that we're doing this for. But this is sort of, this allocation, A10, it's O2, I was gonna say A103. It's a much more broad basket that covers all of, environmental services, senior management, one or the other, I guess, isn't it? What all is in A102? Quite a lot.
A102 is myself and all of the technical and operational staff based at the office. And all of the combined work, and so this includes things like the waste composition study, the systems efficiency review, and tipping fee assessment, and those are expenses that we don't normally have.
Not every year,
Yeah.
they're cyclical
Yes, exactly.
and required. Ministry of Environment says you're gonna do this.
Yes, and you know, some of them are outcomes from our resource recovery plan in our financial administration recommendations and the waste composition study we did just before the organic started at Oceania, and we did a couple of days of it here in Creston as well, so that becomes sort of our baseline for how all these diversion programs, and it's actually really good evidence for showing the province how EPR programs are not working in our area.
Advocacy.
Okay, it still doesn't make sense to me. A102 is resource recoveries, it is the salaries, overtime benefits. I'm looking at it now. But the jump from 23 to 24 budget is 200,000, it's more than double. I don't understand, I'm missing something here.
It is our turn to have some very major studies
Take
which are in
turns.
stream done. No, because of our operating certificate and the conditional approval from Minister Amon.
Yeah, like I said, it's based on the operating expenses for the service, so the A102, like I said, is our sort of overhead for resource recovery and the combined consulting or projects that are district-wide fit into that service. And every year, based on the value of the operating budget for each of the services, they get added up in a percentage for each determined, so that over the course of the year, it demonstrates 25% of our time is in east and 30 blah 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 in the west and 30 in the southern region. And then so each of the subregions gets their portion of that allocation service. That's the overhead for running the service, essentially running all the resource recovery services. So that would include people that oversee recycling, oversee composting, oversee the waste and sort of our operations and our technical work. So
A102 is all staff.
A102 is also staff and consultants.
Yeah,
Can I weigh into this? It is a problem that you're likely from many other budgets very familiar with. Your increase is to a large portion triggered by a surplus funding of the 2023 A102 services. In A102, we had in 2023 a surplus of $440,000 that we used to fund that service. That is not, or almost not there in 2024. Therefore, you have to make up that surplus that you used to finance A102 in 2023. You divvy that $440,000 up between the three waste subregion. That means you would alone from that probably be in the neighborhood of $120,000 to $130,000 increase just alone from not having that surplus.
Oh, why didn't you just say that?
We dug a little hole.
Nobody asked me.
Yeah, I couldn't remember
Sorry,
that.
we
Yeah,
made
it was
that budget.
441.
Yeah.
A102?
Yeah.
Yeah, that, okay. Digging out of a hole is part of the problem.
Okay, so Moving to 182, that's the general admin transfer, so that saw an increase from what you saw in November. Similarly with the environmental services, the on line 186. And I don't know that there was much change in the capital works, so I think that's largely it for this budget. For the questions.
Don't see any other, nobody online. You got Walter online, I guess. Yeah, are we good? Gonna move to recycling then? Oh, should we do this? No, we will wait. Recommendations for all three. It's okay. Should we go ahead with A116 then, Amy? Sure. Now, on this, I don't think I have a copy of this. We had multiple copies of, does somebody have multiple copies of A116? Do you have more than one there?
19.
What, 19 and 16? Both be there. Roger and I would
19.
love to have one.
119. And another 18. 16.
So it's somewhere in somebody's file.
About a 16?
I have a 16.
You want to?
Do you have extras? You've got, take that paperclip off of there, sir, and you got 3 or 4 of them probably. A116 is very brief.
You're probably right.
There we
It
go.
was very thick.
He was hoarding A116. Well, town that gets the paper.
Who else those are?
Yeah, Roger. That's those. Do you have yours, Amy? Or you got it? Isn't there one more? Oh, there are 2. Good. You, and Walter, sorry, you don't get big printouts that are legible like we do.
I know, I've got 2 computers, Gary, so I'm looking at it, the expanded version on my computer where I can actually see it. The one that Amy's showing is a little bit, I gotta really squint.
What hers does for me, is I look at the pattern of that and match it to the pattern of this sheet. That's about all I can do. Yep.
Okay,
Thanks.
we'll just start us off with, I could call it a good news story, it's not as good as it could be, but we did end up with more incentives than we had budgeted. Incentives are based on the tonnage of materials we collect, so that's a number in flux depending on what comes to our sites during the year. As mentioned, we have a framework coming to joint to ask for some clarity on what to include in a letter to the province, and which we'll be sharing the difference between what it costs us versus what these incentives fund. I did reach out to Recycle BC in helping to prepare that letter, and they clarified that they're still undergoing their incentive review and consultation, and they do plan to have a new set of incentives in place by January 1st, 2025.
Trouble there is if they say 10% increase, the Fraser Valley and Lower Mainland and Okanagan say Yahoo, and we'll say, so what? We need the one size fits all is our problem.
Yeah.
They could double or quadruple it, we'll still be subsidizing this to the $1 million plus. But I wanna see something increase.
So this value is just showing that increase year-end value, and we just have a very modest inflator annually based on that, but it could, and I don't suspect much change for 24, but it'll be volume dependent or tonnage dependent, but 25 and on, maybe we'll see some increases there. So the value on line 1, number 13 has changed since we spoke in November. It's reflective of, to the most part, some of the new incentives and or not new, but the larger than expected incentives and the change in the salary that all manage. And I don't think there's too many other adjustments, but that's a small one. So the salaries item on on line 18, it was increased because it moved that training and onboarding costs previously in S186, it moved it here because it's allocated for the recycling stuff, so we wanted to keep all recycling related costs here. And then line 19, the year end was, I just have it highlighted because it was higher than expected, and again, based on a lot of emergency coverage for shifts for everything there. The director's values changed. I had been using a rate from a year or so ago, so the per meeting rate was higher, so I reflected it based on that. That's on line 28, or number 28.
So like for actuals, like $1,100 travel, again, that didn't include any joint, or it did include joint? I guess the joint resource comes to 186, 187, okay, so included.
Yeah, so the
Oh,
there's a value that most everything comes for the lead hands and the directors, all those expenses get through the year get allocated to S186, and then at the end of the year we break off that percentage and transfer it to the
and just to note, I don't know if Shanna caught Director Newell's back.
Through the chair, I reduced the education and training, I think previously 1,000 and we introduced it down to 500. Contracted services for line 27, that was adjusted and reduced it by, originally it was at a 10% increase. And so in both 24 and 25. So this is the collection for satellite depots and our ICI program. The contract we're going to extend until for 3 months, so that we'll have more time to revise or do the procurement process. So that contract change won't come until later in the year. So I reduced it down to a 5% increase in 24 and kept the 10% in 25.
And the 5%, is that a sort of built-in, if we extend it, is there a built-in
Yes.
escalator for fuel prices?
It has an annual adjustment that would come regardless of the new contract or not, so we would need something to reflect that. And we do have work orders for the depot maintenance, which is the toilets and the garbage and the snow removal. Frequently that stuff gets coded to the main work order, and so I just demonstrated that I had some value in there previously. I just allocated it all into that
On
one work order.
snow removal, we had a running conversation about that this morning. I talked to Stu Durning in the parking lot. So he's happy to be walking out there, and this is 1 year we're not pushing snow around in January, February here, or barely. And then when we sat down in here, we're talking about what sites and contracts have a monthly minimum or a weekly minimum. Do our contracts have, like we have, Oswald and Crawford Bay, there's like a standby minimum. How many months does that apply to? If you don't know offhand, that's fine.
Yeah,
But-
I don't know offhand, I think it's 4 or 5 months, and not all sites have it. Some of the new contractors, when we did the snow removal contract
Flexible.
a while ago, they just had a per service charges, and some of them built in a standby fee, and so once your service is provided go over that standby fee, then you pay by the servicing.
Yeah.
But then they have that guaranteed minimum, but it's not in all of them. I suspect it's a way that they will all start going though, because of the level of insurance required. I don't imagine this is a good year to be a snow removal contract.
Okay, thanks.
And might have stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what line were we still?
47, 48, around there.
Oh, yeah,
40.
47, so this is contractor services regarding recycling. So why is it that we would negotiate a 5% increase and then a 10%, and then back to a 5. What changed? What's changing in
So the
2025 where they need an additional 5%?
So through the chair, the contract's expiring this year, or the original term has ended. Sorry, we've actually done the first 2 terms and the extensions, so we need a new contract. So this, every contract has an annual adjustment built into them. So that's what 24, I thought the contract actually expires in June, so I put in a 10% inflator because I thought we'd have a new contract mid-year. Generally, you can expect to see a higher rate at a contract renewal period. We're gonna extend it for 3 months and do the contract start date in the fall. So I suspect there'll be a slightly less of an impact on the overall value for the year, but we'll still, in June, we'll still have that annual adjustment occur.
They don't do CPI for an adjustment? 5% is not CPI.
No, we don't
No,
do
it's
CPI,
whatever
it's based
is
on the fuel
pushed.
index and a lot of the contracts are a little bit different, these ones have fuel and labor index, some of them have hauling index. We're moving more to a CPI transportation industry index, so that it's simpler, because the calculation is really complicated and
Okay.
smaller contractors don't like talking about it, but I find it confusing, so I'm not surprised that others don't, so it, yeah, so we're trying to simplify it, but we're not, and for some contracts, we have moved to just CPI, I think with the household hazardous waste. We did move to, over CPI.
And we're, like normally we go a 3-year contract with the option for 2 1-year extensions.
Yeah.
And we're at the limit pretty much, and they may not agree to extension anyway.
Yeah, we have checked with them and they're fine to extend for this 3-month period and with the current terms, including the annual adjustment that would happen in June, so we're fine for that, but we're looking to change the other subregions to have a similar pricing structure as what you have in the east here, where with the satellites, you have a per super sag rate, whereas at the other districts, so the other subregions, we do it per site. Full service, and so I think we're gonna model it more after what you guys got here, it seems to be more cost effective. The utilities on line 58, I've reduced that. It is higher than past year's budget, so because we are looking to get a power connection at the car wash, so.
That's you didn't tag 2024 for the reduction.
I think 24 is higher because that's the year we will have install cost, and I've actually included in that.
Oh,
that
Fortis
budget.
charges? for-
Yeah, and then moving in 25, but I think I had that, I had the future years at that elevated level that we have in 24, and we don't have the install costs in future years, it's just a lot of diesel fuel.
Well, it's electrical, it's all of them, isn't it?
It's Fortis and then
Plus.
Gas. Or whoever feels it superior, whoever feels the propane here, yeah. And then similarly, what you saw, you'll see this in all the services, so the transfer to A102, recovery, transfer to general admin, and transfer to A100, the environmental services, so it's all adjusted based on the value that they provided. That's from us.
So our bottom line,
So East Recycling costs us shy of $600,000.
Yes.
well, no, the net
That's what
is
it says.
half a year. No, it's half, but there's some recovery,
Yeah, there's
Well, that's including your income.
right? Expenses are 575
Yeah.
and,
it's closer to 5 when you take off the incentive.
there are internally built incentives there. Yeah, it says $500,000. And you had the other two, and we're spending $2 million on recycling roughly in the coming year as a shift from our main waste services as a
That's helping the
subsidy.
environment.
So as I mentioned, we've been asked casually at meetings to prepare a letter for the ministry in regards to funding and challenge with the EBR program, so when we meet at joint in coming weeks here, we will look for some specifications on what you want to include in that letter, and then we'll draft come back in March. And this is exactly one of the things we're pointing out is once you take off the incentives, and Recycle BC doesn't address ICI at the present, but if you take all that stuff off, we're like district-wide, it's costing us $1 million to offer the RBC recycling program. They argue that includes satellite depots, which is not, we choose to have those satellite depots, but that's still, I think it was around 200,000. So we could just go to core
So
depots.
that includes me bringing my own bag to the grocery store. Kidding. But it's the packaging and those sorts of things that still need to get worked on, producing the waste. That's
Mhm.
long term.
Yeah.
Long term. So, I mean, at best, can you expect that it's gonna cost us less to run a recycling program over time? Or is it gonna start costing us more?
Through the chair, I suspect the costs are not gonna go down. However, what we're gonna be lobbying is that the incentive, the funding from the producer goes up.
So our subsidy could go down if the BC recycling is free was true. It's not true. If they paid us more for the product.
Looks like Uli had put up his hand again.
Sorry, Uli, yeah.
Sorry, question through the chair to Amy. The user fee, so the reimbursement from the recycling program, does that include the transfer of the incentives from the Western subregion already?
It online too, it does. So there's 24,000 that comes in from the west.
Okay, I didn't roll it up. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you remember why we have that. We've got 12 core depots. So you could say, well, 3 subregions, you have 4 each, but we don't have the population. We couldn't justify that. We could justify 2.8 or something, or shy of 3 in theory core depots. We said, no, let's locate the core depots where they'd be most effective, save us money as a region, as a regional district. And then recognizing West has more core depots where the hauling is paid for under the EPR program. That West has reduced its potential cost for satellite depots. And so there's a calculation where they share a little bit of that savings with Central and East.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I think Walter's very happy to do that.
Walter?
And who says West does not share?
Never again will I say that, Walter, ever.
Not as often. He won't say that as often as he normally does.
Mhm.
So got the bottom line there, cheap at half the price, I'd like to say. Do you want to do 119? Are we needing, we're an hour and a half in, should we do a 5-10 minute stretch? If does that make sense? If it's 26 past, what if we go till 35, well, shit, 27 past, 8 minutes, everybody get up, stretch,
All right.
return a call, and we'll be back at
Just have anyone.
3:35 in here. We got this, we have a closed meeting as well, so
Okay.
a few things to cover, sure.
Right.
And I'm gonna go steal that water jug over there. Craig never drinks water. Look at they gave us. corner. All right, boy, somebody has to set the clock on this thing. Oh, that's hours in. Hey, it's 35 past. We will call to order again. And back to Amy.
So A119, this is compost. So as noted, we had projected 60,000, 66,000 in communities and only appear to have received around 20. So we scaled back the budget for 24 and future years. You know, the all programs, I think the consultants originally suggested 50% for the first year or two, and then creeping up sort of in the
30% of the waste volume.
Yeah, and they stated that it could take 3 to 5 years before you get, and then that's still only sort of in the 95% of your final volume. So we do recognizably have a lot to move still on the ICI, and also we did elect to move the tipping fee down to $80 a ton to further incentivize that diversion. So
Initially,
yeah.
I have a question on this, maybe to town.
Yeah.
In Castlegar, my understanding is they have the big bins and they're taking garden and everything all together, and they got really, your initial volumes at the Canuck site are really good. But I never did ask, what are you allowing in town to go into the compost? Is it grass or clippings and stuff, or
No.
just kitchen?
Kitchen waste.
Just kitchen, so it's all
And
small.
then when you look at the size of the bins.
Yeah.
And the weight factor of the garbage collector,
Yeah.
the bins have to weigh less than 50 pounds for him to
Yeah.
dump them into a truck.
Unless you have the automated truck.
Yeah, because he doesn't have the automated truck, so.
But they're buying, or they bought one. But we'd have to convert bins, or like, could the bins take more?
Not really. Last week, it's funny you mentioned that, because last week we took the bin off of the branch and I thought, it's pretty heavy, might be around 50 pounds. And I just happened to be around when the collection guy came, so I ran out there and I said, is this too heavy? Are you gonna take this? Lifted it up. That feels like about 30 pounds. But it was full.
Oh.
We were very wasteful people.
How big is your container?
It's about this tall and about this wide. And some people said, well, why did you get those? Well, we got them because of grant money, for one thing. So the grant that was applied to town, basically, it didn't pay for the bins, but it came close. We looked at what was practical for people to haul out of their house. And even with the bins, that little old lady's angry at me because they have a hard time. It's not so much, it's on wheels, but anybody with stairs, they'd have to take them out of the house.
That's every 2 weeks.
No, it's every week.
Oh, compost every week?
Yeah.
Holy, what do you just eat the middle of your bread?
We have a party,
No crust to eat?
we have a party one night.
Uh-oh, we better call this back to order. Okay, so it's strictly kitchen right now, and I don't know if the volumes were initially calculated that maybe there'd be some grass clippings or other stuff in there or not, but the tonnage is what it is.
Just to add to that, we have free yard garden waste pickup 3 times a year,
And you, yeah,
so
yeah.
that takes care of that.
yard waste, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And we do compost a fair amount of urine garden in the system, but that's
Pulled out,
collected and
yeah.
taking fees in the waste service, so it doesn't,
Yeah.
not reflected here.
One other comment, not exactly money related, but people have found, and personally we found the same thing. If you take the kitchen waste out of your yard compost, which we use compost in the yard, your rat numbers go down
Yeah.
dramatically, because that's what they're there for. So it's been helpful to keep the rats away in.
Okay, so line 11, one thing I failed to note when we discussed this in the waste service is that 684,000 includes 200,000 for that was removed from reserves and added to this transfer. So the 684,000 is not the operating expense; it's in the 480. 200,000 is because this service doesn't have significant enough reserve yet, so it's using money from the waste reserve. And that's a placeholder for now, so depending if we move forward with the leachate pond or not, or what the value of it is. So that would be reduced based on what the actual capital expense is there, so 200,000 is the placeholder for now.
Is that line 11?
That's line 11, yes. Which explains why it's such a big difference in 2020 the other
One time.
years. So actually, as you can see, we ended up with 40,000 deficit carryover from 23, and that's pretty much exactly what we are under budget on the tipping fee revenues, so.
That means your crystal ball was pretty good everywhere else.
Then I think the service doesn't have a whole lot of other changes. I see something that says where they're landed down in the 70s here, so line 71, 73, and 27. Are the other services. And there was an update to the one as well, so those are all based on their budgets for 2024. So that's since we discussed in November.
10% versus 20 and 70 for the other two services.
Yeah, and general admin and IT calculate their values based on each service, so that one is just a direct number allocated by finance for each of the services, whereas the A100 and A102, we do that calculation based on the operating expenses for each of the different services, and then split them, like I mentioned, 10% to compost here, 20% to recycling.
And the bird control wasn't finished all at once, or?
The bird control was completed, the new 25,000 in 24 is for an irrigation system.
Oh, sorry, irrigation on the side there, okay.
Yeah.
So, right now they're just moving a hose around.
Yes, we manually move sprinklers
Is
or hoses.
$25,000 investment gonna save us, or have we got a problem with moisture control?
Well,
Because we have the sensors in there, we need
yeah, the other
to
thing
add
is
moisture at odd times.
it's not as efficient, so it could, the other thing, it could include tanks for holding water, clean water, because we actually had to ship water in this summer. Because the pond dried up, so these ponds they're either too full and we're pumping out the material and sending it to wastewater treatment plant, or we're bringing it in, so both services, this one and the one over in Selmo, have some investigation going on with the leachate ponds. So who knows what our season will be like this year. So that was it for the farmhouse. That one didn't have a lot of changes. So the recommendation is on the agenda, was that these are, I didn't make any changes based on your comments, but if you have any changes you want me to address, and I can do that, and then otherwise these would go into the financial plan as discussed, with the exception of changes to those provisions or transfer to and from other services.
So, and then we wanna add the words, maybe, I don't know if Shanna, if you picked it up later, I think what you were suggesting that we say, subject to provisions, comma, contribution changes to or from other services, comma, or whatever, plus a zero contribution to reserve for zero contribution to reserve for stabilization fund in 2024.
Yes, Chair, the only change I made, I had swapped out the word plus for
Yeah.
and.
Yeah, and either, sure, yep.
Would
Okay,
you like me to read that back to the committee?
yep, please.
That the East Resource Recovery Committee approved the draft 2024 to 2028 financial plans for A, Service S186 East Resource Recovery, B, Service A116 Recycling Program East Subregion, C, Service A119 Organics Program East Subregion, subject to provisions or contribution changes to or from other services and zero contribution to reserves from the stabilization fund.
Sure. And to reserves in 2024,
Yeah.
but you've shown it across the line. No, that's good. Anybody, do we have a mover, seconder for that recommendation? Does it make sense? Moved? Seconded? So discussion?
Well, I just want to point out that in Norway and Sweden, they're net zero exporter of waste, and they're very successful in generating power and heat completely within the confines of their countries. Just want to say that.
Hey.
I feel better now.
Hey, and then any discussion pertaining to the recommendation? Okay, hearing none, all in favor? Okay, thanks.
And Willie probably knows that.
Oh, we might know way more than he's willing to share with us about what happens in areas with one half the geographic size of British Columbia, a population of 80 million. I don't know what it is now. But he worked in an area that was an entirely different geography and demographic. So I have to go back to my other sheet here because I don't have the one printout. So public time would be, I think, shoot, it's the wrong one. Too many things open. I believe it's public time next. Does anyone have the proper agenda open right now?
Correct, Chair, it is public time, and I
Here it
believe
is.
you do have members of the public
Yes.
online.
So any questions from the public for this committee? If you have, please unmute yourself, state your name and your question, please. Just wait a second in case somebody's trying to find that button. Financial plans. Oh, we had discussion items, sorry, landfill development. General overview.
That was last.
Nope, sorry, that was last time. Still scrolling up. Still scrolling up. Okay, no questions from the public? In that case, I would take a recommendation to close the meeting to the public for an in-camera session. Moved and seconded, all in favor? So thanks to the members of the public who did listen in. If you didn't have questions for us now, you know our emails, you can send the questions later. But if you would please log off from the meeting, we have a in-camera session to hold next. Where Shanna, of course, you can lock people up and lock the meeting if you want.
We have one member left. I will just give them a moment to
Yep.
let them log out before I log them out.
Okay, fair enough.